factory farms, concentrated animal feeding operations, known as CAFOs.
I like to refer to them as animal factories because the animals are nothing more than machines. They don't get to see the outdoors their entire life.
CAFOs can house between 700 and 1 million head of livestock in confined spaces. The animal excrement produced daily at a medium-sized factory farm is equal to a city of 70,000 people. Untreated waste is channeled into huge open pits. A toxic brew of feces, chemicals, hormones, bacteria, antibiotics, and blood creates noxious fumes and dangerous compounds. It is then sprayed as fertilizer, seeping into groundwater and local streams.
We've seen 12 CAFOs come in within a 10-mile radius of our farms, and we've got over 60 lagoons with over 400 million gallons of waste.
Lynn's own family have suffered maladies such as heart attacks, respiratory illness, and other symptoms attributed to the side effects of CAFO pollution.
There are three main gases that are airborne from the CAFO operations, and those are methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia as a respiratory irritant.
In 2000, after runoff polluted a state park lake, the Hennings were falsely blamed as the whistleblowers, but this accusation only prompted them into action.
We did water sampling, take pictures of our meters to show violations. We were willing to go the extra mile and sharing the information.
The people around here don't want money. What they want is the pollution to stop, and you can do it. You give the enforcement agencies the power to write a ticket and close them down until they can clean up their act.
As a Sierra Club water sentinel, Lynn often traveled up to 150 miles a week collecting data that eventually made it to the state's Department of Environmental Quality, which issued hundreds of citations.
The citizens are our eyes and ears, and Lynn has been tremendously valuable.
In 2008, due in large part to Lynn's perseverance, a CAFO operation was denied a permit for the first time ever in Michigan. It was a major victory for Lynn and her organization. But Lynn's work has not come without risk. Her car is often followed or forced off the road, and recently gunfire shattered a window at a family member's house.
We had dead animals left on our front porch. We had skunks, possum, and raccoon left in the mailbox, and none of it worked.
Lynn just does not quit. I mean, she keeps going. If there's something happening, she goes and checks it out. She's really been able to have a broad effect on the issue.
Lynn now hopes her legacy will be cleaner, more regulated, and sustainable agricultural practices.
I think we need to train our children to raise food for the next generation. And if there was a case where a CAFO could run properly, they would have to put animals out on pasture where the family farmer has raised food for generations.
For outstanding environmental achievement in North America, the 2010 Goldman Environmental Prize is awarded to Lynn Henning, Clayton, Michigan.
Okay, I've also put together a PowerPoint for you to see on the ground. A lot of that was just what they had come from. Okay, at the beginning here, I want to show you all the pathogens that are caused from animal waste. And you can go through here, and these are in the water, and they can be contracted by humans, by body contact, by swimming, by children playing in streams. Milwaukee, Wisconsin had the Cryptosporidium and Giardia. Walkerton, Ontario, people died because they got this, because there was manure in the water. This was a discharge that was only about 5 miles from our house. It destroyed 2 miles of stream and killed all the fish. This just gives you an idea of how many CAFOs we have in Michigan. They seem to form and build near headwaters, streams, and they locate near waterways to discharge waste. This is a sample. We had the state agency come out and do an inspection on a very large CAFO. And they came back the very next day because they had the attitude that you're not going to tell us what to do, and they dumped an entire lagoon. We had E. coli that was 7.5 million, when 300 is full body contact for swimming. This is drinking water downstream, 25 miles, and people don't know that it's coming at them. This is the algae we find right after a discharge of waste in the water. And we have scientists now looking at Lake Erie in Michigan to see if there's a connection between the toxic blue-green algae and from the manure below these facilities. This is just another picture of the algae. This is a very large discharge, and they're trying to call this stormwater. They go out and spread fields with waste before rainfall, and when the rain washes it off, they call it stormwater. It's non-point source pollution, even though they intentionally went out and spread it before the rain. This is a catch basin and a field tile. Field tile were used and meant to drain surface and subsurface water so farmers could get on the land. Now they're used as underground bad boys to hide waste and discharge it to our waterways. This is a stormwater drain out of our largest dairy, and we have found nothing but bloodworms and algae since it's began. This is iron bacteria. We have a wetland of almost 20 acres that's dead now due to the fact they've been discharging waste down over the hill into a large wetland. And the sad part, this wetland, you always heard frogs and birds, and now it's like a dead zone. This is an animal waste discharge. It's drinking water downstream. It ran for over 2 weeks in the waterway. The state did not contact the drinking water facilities downstream. No one knew this was coming at them, and they don't treat your drinking water for manure. This is milk house waste. They use these large tile under the fields, and they're all the way up to the facilities. When they have catch basins or drains inside the facility that washes it down, and then it goes to a waterway. This is almost a mile away from one of these large CAFOs. This is a picture of a brand new lagoon. We went and did a tour at one. And this is your earthen packed clay-lined lagoons. And you can see the cracks in the back walls. We measured with tape measure, and we had cracks all the way down that were over 8 inches wide in these lagoons. We have 3 facilities in Michigan that have groundwater contamination. We have copper, we have iron, manganese, and arsenic. This is a tile. A Michigan State University has facilities that they call their Center of Excellences. They applied this on snow-covered, frozen ground before a predicted thaw, and it ran for almost 3 weeks into the waterway. This is what the creek looked like for 3 weeks. And we worry about this because our kids play in the creeks, and, you know, we grew up playing in the streams out in the country. And now we have to worry about the children getting, you know, viruses and pathogens and bacteria. To show you the impacts of CAFOs, they destroy the environment. There's lack of enforcement, poor regulations. The procedure, they produce enormous amounts of waste that can cause human health, air pollution, damage from hauling. We have over $200,000 worth of road damage just in our little community. And our road commission, the taxpayers, can't afford to fix and repair. We have devaluation of property. We have numerous people that's lost up to 50% of their property values. And it changes the rural character of the community. It pins neighbor against neighbor because you have neighbors that will rent their land because they need the money. But when they come in and destroy it, there's nothing they can do, and then they come back to you and say, what did we do? And they've lost the touch to the community, and we see a arrogance of takeover and control and harassment. This is a drain that goes from a milk house. As you can see, they wash all their milk house waste out into the roadside ditch. CAFOs cause water pollution. The pollutions can reach groundwater and surface water from manure spills, leaking lagoons, illicit field tile, over-application of waste. There's 168 chemicals in manure. The US EPA did a study in 2001. And all these chemicals are in the water and they don't test for them. Waste is applied before predicted rain, runoff, atmospheric deposition, nutrients, eutrophication, harmful algae blooms, contaminated drinking water, antibiotics, hormones, and chemicals. This is a picture of what they call a pivot irrigator. They spray it onto the ground. It blows in the wind. People get literally sick. You can't hang laundry. We have fly outbreaks. And people's cars literally get sprayed with waste if it's close to the road. CAFOs cause air pollution. Harmful chemicals and pollutants can be released into the air. Emissions from the confinement buildings, waste applied to the land or piled irrigation can pollute the air. Hydrogen sulfide. My mother and father-in-law, my father-in-law is a lifetime family farmer, and they both were diagnosed in 2003 with hydrogen sulfide poisoning. In Minnesota, the XL dairy was shut down and declared a public health hazard. The odors and particulate matter, greenhouse gas are also air pollution from CAFOs. 2 years ago, my husband was 53 at the time, and he was out splitting wood, and the emissions caused him to have a heart attack, and he had to have quadruple bypass. And we're working with the state agencies now for the first time. We're sitting down table with the Department of Ag, the water department, the health, community health, and we're talking about the health effects from these facilities. This is silage leachate, which is when they chop the corn and store it in the bunkers for feed for the cattle. It makes a juice, which ferments and turns to ammonia. And it smelled so bad when we took samples. This was at a sportsman's club. They were having a wedding reception that day that they had to cancel because the smell was so bad that the people were getting sick. CAFOs destroy local communities. They devalue property nearby, slow down economic growth. They destroy the rural character of the community. CAFOs can drain your local government by increased traffic, road damage, construction, and maintenance for like culverts on the roads, the weight of the equipment. They break the edges of the road because the equipment's too wide. Costs for bridges, culverts, and taxes are externalized to the community. The facilities are getting development right easements and agricultural agreements, so they'll tell you they pay their taxes, but they get a credit back on their income tax, and they get all their money back, but maybe 5%. So these are things that we need to change. A CAFO will induce depopulation. We had one CAFO that bought 5 houses closest to the dairy, so nobody could ever, dispute if he wanted to expand because he would meet all the criteria. And they bring in the labor to live in the homes. The CAFO owner purchased, actually it was 6 homes. Migrant labor has replaced our local income. Housing has deteriorated. These houses that they buy around them, they buy as is. There's no septic fields. We're out in the country. It's the boondocks. And they don't maintain these homes for even the workers. This was back in the early days. The 2 manure semi-tankers trapped me with a pickup truck on a back road. I was out water monitoring, and we had to have state police come get us out of the situation. And the semi-truck driver came at me head on my side of the road. And they didn't haul him to jail. They just let him go. CAFOs overuse water. A lot of people don't look at this, but when a CAFO can use many times up to 150,000 gallons of water a day, and when you get several of these over the same aquifer, we need to start looking at water use because they're using clean, fresh groundwater to make waste, to wash down milk parlors, to wash manure out of buildings and barns. This is a picture of one of our larger CAFOs. As you can see over on where the blue things are, the lagoon has overflowed and all the calves are standing in wastewater. Those are calf hutches, the little white things. CAFOs can cause antibiotic resistant. Animals at CAFOs are stressed and more prone to illness, which may cause acceleration of bacteria. Antibiotics are added to the feed to prevent outbreaks of disease and increase growth. 70% of the antibiotics in the U.S. are used in livestock or animals. Bacteria that are not killed by the antibiotics become stronger and reproduce more rapidly. This bacteria can spread to other animals and humans through land application or contaminate groundwater and surface water. Medicines used to treat diseases become less effective and may cause serious threat to the public. And we're also seeing that when they spread this on the land, human waste has to be treated. This doesn't. This is a stream right above a very large town, and they had a very huge discharge, and we took pictures, and then we took it down to the city officials, and they run rampantly to re-clean and reset the stuff at the drinking water plant because they didn't know it was coming at them. CAFOs are not sustainable. They receive huge subsidies that you are paying for through your taxes. There is no such thing as cheap food. You are paying for it. These government handouts enable CAFOs to sell their product at unrealistic prices. The bigger you are, the more you get. Subsidies can also be direct through universities, development right easements, tax credits, economic development grants, digester grants that you are paying for. And we're finding now that the larger facilities, there's a website called, it's the Environmental Working Group, and they keep track of this. And if you go in, and we've been tracking that some of these facilities will create many different limited liability companies, and they're drawing subsidies under several names for one facility. This is another big discharge that we had that was almost a mile from the facility. They literally had a pump hooked up to the lagoon and pumping it down the tile lines. CAFOs use excessive amounts of fossil fuel and electricity. We got a call last week. We were out of power for a whole week. And they said the local dairy was using $400 a day just to make electricity by generation. And we're seeing tremendous amounts of waste being hauled further and further away. We've had facilities haul as far as 32 miles from a facility just to get rid of waste. And they're being subsidized for this through the Farm Bill. So we need to pay attention and start looking at this because EQIP money through the Farm Bill is subsidizing and building lagoons for CAFOs. They're paying them to put waste on land, and we need to start addressing these problems. This is a catch basin that the County Drain Commission had put in. When he put it in a tile, we're all connected and it was nice and pretty. The local CAFO operator had an idea that if he cut the tile, he could put a plug in there when he wanted to drain his waste to the open stream. So we took pictures of the drain, and now they've put a grate on top and chained it down so the CAFO operator can't get back in the drain. CAFOs misuse field drainage tile. Field drainage tile, for some of you may not know, is like your city sewer system under the ground. It's used to drain water off of fields. And now, when you put liquid waste on top of it, it can reach these tile in minutes, and they all drain to waterways or lakes or streams. And this is where we're seeing the most pollution. When it's over-applied, it can reach it in minutes. Field tile drain to creeks, streams, ditches, lakes, and rivers, and which are all waters of the state, which it's a violation under the Clean Water Act for them to discharge. It can enter through catch basins, tile risers, manholes, gate valves, intentional or accidental waste manner into waters through conduits, always causing illegal discharges. I'll just point out something real quick. These are lawsuits that have happened in Michigan, and the only one that's really important on the basic of this is the top one I want to point out. We have 213 CAFOs in Michigan, and over 45 of them have been fined and penalized. That's over a quarter of them for discharging into waters of the state. My job as a CAFO water sentinel, I go out and do water monitoring. I do layouts and pretty much research each facility, and I can show people how to do water sampling around the facilities. So I do what they call layouts, and this just gives you a general idea. You can go to the Michigan Sierra Club website. We can find a CAFO anywhere in the country in less than 30 minutes and tell you where to sample around that facility. This is an annotated picture of a CAFO. And I do these for the state and federal agents. We go up, there's an environmental flying organization called Lighthawk that takes us up. We do aerial photos, and then we do layouts and show our concerns to the state and federal agencies of the problems with each one of these facilities. This can even extend beyond CAFOs. This can be used for coal plants. It can be used for anything. This is a picture that kind of disturbed me when they took it. It was a very large CAFO that had an overflow from the lagoon, and the animals are drinking wastewater from the lagoon. Animal waste. This is from the USCPO website. A farm with 2,500 dairy cattle is equal to a city of 411,000 people. And I want you to understand, we have several of these 2,500 heads, so if in a 10-mile radius, so you're looking at over 1 million people in a 10-mile radius would be putting waste in these lagoons if it was people. This just shows our website and the things that we do. Anybody looking into CAFOs, you don't have to go back and look it up, hunt it down. We've been documenting for over 10 years. Again, CAFOs are resource intensive. They're unsustainable. The only way they can stay alive is your tax dollars, through the farm bill, through incentives, through all that kind. We've pretty much said all that. And here's what you can do. Get involved, be informed, buy local. Know where your food is coming from. Know your farmer. Know what is in your water. Have you had your water tested? Do you know what's in it? Contact your policymakers if you feel there's problems. And here's my contact information.
We'd like to open the floor up for questions now. There's a microphone up front, so if you have a question, come on up.
Hi, I'm Linda Lewison from Chicago. I deal with radioactive waste, just another kind of waste that we're going to talk about this weekend. Just wanted to ask you what your position is. What is your goal here? Do you want to close them? Do you want people not to eat meat? I'm sure you've been over this before, but I'd like to hear you.
I would have to say that CAFOs, if they cannot operate in a sustainable manner, they do need to be shut down. We need to go back and we need to start teaching our children how to farm again and how to be sustainable, because we can't keep running a system that can't support itself.
Hi, my name is Jane Suzanne, and I worked at US EPA for 30 years, including the beginnings of the NPDES program, and I actually wrote the first CAFO regulations. So I'm kind of horrified to see that our system isn't working very well, and I wondered if you could speak to exactly where you see the breakdown in the regulatory system. I think you said there are over 200 these facilities that do have NPDES permits.
Yes.
So is the problem that the permit limits aren't strong enough, or is it that the state isn't enforcing them, or is it that they're getting around the whole permit thing by the non-point source, applying stuff that just runs off and so isn't subject to the permit? And if the problem is that Michigan isn't enforcing the permit, where is US EPA? They're supposed to be overseeing what the states do and don't do.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Back in 2000, I worked with Arnie Leader from Region 5, and he was the compliance enforcement officer for that division of the US EPA. He brought permits into Michigan, and they started out, they're very good to have permits. We would like to see them a little bit stronger and more enforceable. Right now, Michigan has introduced 2 bills that are in legislature. The EPA will literally have to step in because they're going to eliminate and make it a voluntary program where there's no fines and penalties for any type of water discharge, whether it's point source or non-point source.
So they're going to give the program back to EPA?
Well, that's what we're not sure what they're doing. So they haven't signed the bills yet, but it will be a violation of the Clean Water Act if they do. So, and the other factor is over the years, just in our area, the state had documented over 1,088 violations. They don't have the staff. They have one person to cover, I think we have 5 different sections in the state, and one person covers up to almost 30 counties. Mm-hmm. And they can't get out and do the inspections. We have 2 government agencies. You have the USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and you have the US EPA. The USDA says we're only going to minimize discharges through the Farm Bill programs and this, and the US EPA says 0 discharge, which is where we want to be. 0 discharge to our waterways of waste from animals. And we're having problems with this because we are finding paperwork that the NRCS people are going outside of standards to literally hook up tiles that will discharge to the waterways, but they're just minimizing it because it's only a 4-inch tile instead of a 12-inch tile. So we're finding things in the paperwork now that shows us that we have agencies actually butting heads and fighting each other and not working together.
Unfortunately, that's always how it works.
I understand that, but no, USCPA has been doing a fine job. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Second keynote speaker for the evening. Matt Briggs is a writer, director, and producer of Deep Green. Deep Green is a hopeful documentary about how decarbonizing energy and to restore the natural world and to stop man-made global warming. To give you a glimpse, we have a preview to show you.
We're good at ducking hard truth. You know, when do people start exercising? After the heart attack. We know there's a heart attack coming. It's called climate change. There's no mechanism to stop it other than stopping the production of CO2.
A lot more CO2 these days.
Yeah, a lot of CO2.
If we wait till 2050 to cut carbon emissions by 80%, the game will be over. The Greenland ice sheet will be on its way to becoming history. We'll probably have reached the point of no return.
We are already in the sixth great extinction in the history of life on Earth. The issue is, how great will we allow it to be?
We are the air, and what we do to the air, we do directly to ourselves.
If all of the United States used electricity as productively as the top 10 do, then about 5/8 of the coal-fired electricity wouldn't be needed anymore.
We have the opportunity now with wind and solar and geothermal to invest in energy sources that will basically last forever.
The sun's going to shine, the wind's going to blow, it's going to rain. You know, these are things that are going to happen, and you might as well take advantage of them.
We need less than 1% of the Sahara Desert to supply the whole electricity demand of the world today.
We want all of our projects to generate more energy than they consume and consume more waste than they produce.
People want to be a part of something. They want to contribute to the solution in some way. But consumers can only change their behavior if they have choices.
The target commercial speed is 224 miles an hour.
There's no more time for incrementalism. There's no more time for tiny little improvements. Now we've got to make bold, big, audacious moves.
Helping people to learn a new way of doing things at every level is what it's going to take.
You may think what you do will not affect me, but in reality, we affect each other every day.
What we're looking at now is not just a local environmental problem here. We're talking about the future of civilization.
It's time to be deep green. It's time to really make the difference.
Now, following his talk, there will be a showing of the film and a question and answer period. Now, to discuss the making of Deep Green and the underlying issues highlighted in the film, we welcome Matt Briggs.
I'm taller. I'm going to speak about Deep Green in just a minute, but I'd like to talk about some of the things that motivate me and might motivate some of the rest of us here to be here. If you've walked on the cliffs of the Oregon coast on a sunny day in the winter, if you've snorkeled and scubaed or swum in the diverse schools of big fish, if you've been present at dusk on the upper Grand Ronde River when the elk come out of the woods and start talking to each other. If at the end of a great day of skiing you wait until everybody's gone off the hill and you look out over the mountains and see the Cascades in the dusk, and you take that last run by yourself all alone, then you know why we're here. Sorry. 18 days ago, my 96-year-old mom decided to stop eating. It was a long descent, but it was so beautiful, and it was so truthful, and there was so much intimacy and freedom. We were bathing in it, inhaling it, getting infused by it, and hoping it was everywhere, every day. She died last night. So she was very practical, unselfish, and a saint. And that's a big reason why I'm here tonight, to try to do something good. So in the background, while our family is trying to be, is becoming the best of themselves, the people of the Middle East and all these countries in the Arab Middle East are throwing out their tyrants and embracing freedom and democracy. And it's interesting to note some of the motivations for why they were doing this. High prices of food, being unable to feed their families. And the causes of this are very attributable to climate change. The forest fires in Russia last year were 2,000 miles long. And the drought caused Russia not to export any wheat. There are droughts in China. There are floods in Pakistan. There are floods in Australia and droughts in Australia. All of this has been predicted by climate models. And to contrast what was going on in my family and what's going on in the Middle East in this country during the same period of time, as reported by Jane Mayer of the New Yorker and Paul Krugman of the New York Times, the LA Times, and Joe Rahm at climateprogress.org, which I highly recommend if you don't know it. Some corporations and politicians were using our deficit problems to make a power grab to change some of the things we are doing to protect the environment. This is besides trying to eliminate the EPA in its entirety. And these things are supported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and fossil fuel industries like Koch Industries in Wisconsin. They don't just want to eliminate collective bargaining for public employees. They want to sell public power stations by the governor's whim to whoever he decides at a no-bid level. They want to eliminate public hearings on wetlands. They want to require voters to have photo ID. They want to ban wind power in Wisconsin. This is in the bill. Collective bargaining gets the headlines, but there are a lot of other things below that. And now, Think Progress and Joseph Rahm again have done some research on the usage of cyber warfare by these same groups, U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Koch Industries. So where computers funded by, PSYOPs programs from Palantir, Barrico Technology, and HB Gary Federal, collectively known as Team Finis, are being used to snoop on families of environmental activists, progressive people, and scraping social media and submitting false documents, crashing websites, taking offensive data extraction. Anyway, sort of information operations, and that's sort of a term in military speak for anti-terrorist computer attacks. And this is on environmentalists, I would say public interest lawyers would be in that zone. To me, this is a red flag. It feels like we, in our country, we have the same kind of thing going that Mubarak and Gaddafi had. It's rich and powerful people willing to do almost anything to stay in power. And anyway, I would say let's look at the fine print of these things. My own solution to a lot of this stuff is to just unplug, which you'll see in the movie tonight. Unplug from these things that are preying on us. It's not just fossil fuel people. It's the investment banks. It's industrial agriculture that is poisoning us or making food that makes us sick. It's crisis medicine that keeps us sick. It's lots of bad ideas that need to be rejected and put in the dustbin of history. So, and I have one other thing to say before we go on to the movie. Has anybody seen Gasland? Yes, some people there. Josh Fox lived in a place much like Michigan where he had a family farm, and then the gas companies came to Michigan and started drilling wells, and he started thinking about what would happen with that, and just grabbed his camera, went on the road, and tracked down the consequences of fracking the ground, which means splitting it open so that the natural gas can come out, with about 1 million gallons of water, again, usage of fresh water going down a gas well, and about 500 chemicals, the biggest ones of which are things like biodiesel and benzene. And he found, water taps that lit on fire, exploding outhouses, destroyed water tables with chemicals, asthma levels of 25% around big well drilling areas, and key to me, in tests in Houston, the leaks of the methane and benzene from the well caps of tens of thousands of natural gas wells around Houston are greater than the carbon emissions of all the cars and trucks driving around. So I want you to think, when you're talking about stopping coal exports and closing coal plants, leave out the fracted natural gas. That's 90% of the natural gas now. And it should not be included. It's not sustainable. If you're going to destroy the water table of the United States and you have more carbon emissions than oil, and who knows how close they are to coal itself, it is not clean energy to substitute. There are a lot better ways, a lot better solutions than that. We're going to look at them tonight in the movie. In many ways, a documentary filmmaker is much like a lawyer. We go out and gather the evidence and build a case and create all the best ways we can reach out and touch somebody's heart in the jury or in the audience and change their minds so that they will change the way they live to what we think makes sense. In my view, keeping the temperature of the earth down and keeping the earth from being poisoned are the two biggest environmental problems. And we can fix a lot of both by stopping burning fossil fuels, converting to sustainable agriculture, and restoring the forests. Deep Green, we try to show the best solutions all over the world in 9 countries we went to that show this. And we've decided to go on the road to events like this. And I don't know if the people saw, we were at the Halt Center last Thursday to a sold-out crowd of 500. We turned away maybe 40 or 50 people on a snow night. So, yay, Eugene, you know. But the goal for us is to make the size of the solution equal to the size of the problem. And to do that, we have to change pretty rapidly to lower the carbon footprints of the 1 billion high carbon emitters, and there's people like that in China, just as much as there's people like that in the United States, by 80 or 90%. And if you really want to do it, you're going to do it in 10 or 20 years and not 40 years, because the speed of the increase of the carbon is so big. Last year, we went down 8% because of the recession. China went up 13% in 1 year. That's 21% difference. China is just ripping. At a previous event today at the Confucius Institute in the Asian Studies, we were talking about how we can help China make that transition, not just us, but China to what they want to do, to what they need to do. And there are some fantastic people. You'll see Barbara Finnemore, the head of the NRDC in China, who I think is one of the most important people. I think that would be great. Anyway, the last thing I'd like to say is MIT's done a study on just what the consequences of not changing this stuff are. And it bears repeating, I think. By 2100, some say 2070, you won't be able to grow any grain in any central continent anywhere in the world. No soybeans, no wheat, no corn. Be too hot. Won't work. Most of the forests of the world will be eaten by bugs, beetles, and they'll burn down, and you'll have more of a brushy kind of a follow-up. The oceans will rise maybe 6 feet this century and 20-something next century, and New York, Shanghai, London. How much will it cost to move those places? And these same oceans are going to acidify because the carbon's interacting with the ocean and making carbonic acid. And it's developing, it's taking the shells off every shelled animal in the sea faster. It will in about 0 to 40 years, faster than those animals can make it. And a whole ton of plankton are shelled animals. So when you have this kind of situation, you're going to crash the food system in the ocean. Besides the overfishing and the crash with the carbonic acid, you're going to have an ocean full of jellyfish and not whales and dolphins and crabs and shellfish. The deserts will expand. They'll go from 1/3 to maybe 1/2 of the world. The Amazon's going to be a steppe desert like East Africa, by 2070, something like that. Hurricanes intensify, tornadoes multiply. In China and Asia in general, China and India, where they're pumping the groundwater so fast, it's going down, I don't know, depends on the place, huge amounts every year. If you're going to lose the groundwater and the glaciers, you're not going to have any water in the rivers, and you're not going to have groundwater to pump. I mean, who's going to feed China and India? Huge refugee, social, environmental collapse stuff. Anyway, I would say that most of the standard environmental causes that we've been working on, habitat protection, the wild places, the forest, oceans, are going to be trumped by the rise in temperature. So my focus in this movie is on keeping the temperature of the Earth down and how we go about that. It would really be better just to skip all this bad stuff. And the potential is so fantastic. That's the other thing. The consequences are so bad and the potentials are so good that it starts to be a real easy question to answer for me. I mean, Donella Meadows in Beyond the Limits showed us the way a long time ago. She talked about three things we got to change. We have to limit our numbers. And we don't have population in this movie, but the research that I've done, and you can correct me, there's lots of expertise in this room, is the only way to lower our numbers is to, the best way is to eliminate poverty. And the best way to do that is to empower women worldwide. And one of the best ways to do that is with real microloans, not loan sharking microloans that give women economic freedom and, surprisingly, with funding soap operas that show a different way of men and women and families interacting. The biggest effect that I've heard in Mexico and across the sub-Saharan Africa is when people see an alternative to their traditional way of male-dominated households. And it's, anyway, I highly recommend funding organizations like FINCA, F-I-N-C-A, with soap operas. It's the biggest bang for the, one of the biggest bangs for the buck I know. So limit the numbers. And then we have to consume less. It's an easy decision, a hard thing to do. But the main decision is to shift from being a consumer to a restorer. If the economy is 70% in the United States consumption, personal consumption stuff, those are, you can shift that 20%. And though you say, hey, you know, I'm going to restore things, 20%. Consume 50, so, and then start shifting those numbers around. She called it an economy not of growth, but of development. I would say, I would describe it as building a diverse and deep civilization within the limits of our island in the sky. And for me, the third thing was we have to reduce and really eliminate pollution. And the biggest pollution for me is this thing that's going to turn the temperature up. And the biggest thing that's out there, the three biggest things out there that are causing this are burning fossil fuels, by far the biggest, then fossil fuel and unsustainable agriculture with lots of meat eating, and deforestation or the burning of trees down. It's all connected. I mean, everyone's downwind and downstream. We're all, as King Kesey would say, we're all on this bus. It's time to take a few percentage points of the world GNP and solve this problem. It's time to match the size of the solution to the size of the problem. We can fix this. But we just have to decide to care, and that's where what we try to do with this movie. No more doom and gloom, no more knocking people over the heads. We're not bringing this stuff up in the movie. We're trying to get people to care. And what do? How do you make a movie to make people care? We used every possible avenue we could come up with. International treaties would be nice, you know. National laws would be great. Lawyers who kick environmental butt are key. But really, in the end, it's up to us. It's not just a legal case that you can win. It sets a standard. It's your life and your client's life. The way we unplug from the old system of unconscious monopolies run on fossil fuels, pillaging the earth, to a new system of dispersed energy, decentralized wealth, local economies, and the courage to speak truth to power, care about other people, living in the real world, and living well within the natural limits of the earth. My hope is that people will all decide to become early adopters and teachers of these solutions. So tonight we're going to offer what we think are some of the best stories of people working on this and best solutions from 9 countries around the world. If you're inspired, share it with your neighbors, the skeptical family members in Kansas or Mississippi or Florida. We're going to offer some DVDs for sale after this. Send them to them. Spread out the story of how to fix this. And take that inspiration home and see if you can change the way you live in your house and the way you run your business and how you can bring your land and life to a net zero carbon burning for energy. The faster we all go, the fewer consequences for our kids and their kids. It now makes both environmental and economic sense to change the way we live. It's now common sense. We can fix this. Thanks.
Is Water Smart, and it took about 5 of us to come up with the acronym, Sustain and Manage America's Resources for Tomorrow, which may not be the catchiest thing, but smart water and a number of other variations on this theme were already taken. But Water Smart is a really great sustainable water strategy that's really the brainchild of Assistant Secretary Castle. The idea is that water is getting scarcer and scarcer. Climate change is changing how water runs off in the West. It's changing the snowpack, and we need to do something about that. Now, the federal government can't do in the West because the states have primary authority over much of the water. The federal government has to lead by example. We have the bully pulpit that we can use to address these issues. And we're looking at, because water is adequate supplies of water are so important to people, the economy, and the environment, but we have aging infrastructure, we have rapid population growth, depletion of our groundwater resources, all of these land uses that are changing how we use water, including increased domestic energy production. And water shortage and water conflicts have become commonplace in the United States. In the Colorado River Basin, they're in the 11th year of a record drought. Populations in the West are continuing to grow, and these water challenges are just the increasing pressure on water from these challenges has to be addressed. The UN recently concluded that water is the primary medium through which climate change influences the Earth's ecosystem, and thus the livelihood and well-being of societies. I translate that as water is the canary in the coal mine. And we're feeling those impacts, the water impacts of climate change, before anything else. This is last year's drought monitor for the western United States. And the whole West was abnormally dry last year, and that pattern is continuing. It's a little better this year because We have the La Nina, which is giving us a little bit more moisture. But we still have an increasing problem that needs to be addressed. And the Water Smart program is a collaborative program that will bring together the states, local governments, private associations, and NGOs, all the stakeholders basically, so that all voices are heard. We are committed in Interior to a strategic plan that looks at issues within our own house. We're looking at how to reduce our water footprint and make sure that water issues are taken into account in decision making. Water and energy are really inextricably linked. And the increasing emphasis on domestic energy development poses additional pressure on water supplies. Water is utilized in electric power generation, particularly in the east where it's used in cooling. It's been estimated that up to 30% of energy in the United States is used to move water around, cool water, treat water. And that's a lot of energy. We just talked about solar, and we talked about solar last night. Well, sometimes significant amounts of water are required for solar development. And a lot of the solar development takes place in parts of the country that have a lot of sun, but they're also very dry, like the Southwest. So that's just something that we have to take into account in our decision making, is that in places where there are scarce water supplies, you have to build into your planning and your thinking, how are you going to ensure that there's adequate water for that technology? BLM is working hard on fast-tracking energies like wind and solar. And at the Bureau of Reclamation and within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science, we're working to make sure that these issues are considered. This is an old chart. We're currently updating a water census for the United States. We haven't done a water census for over 10 years to look at how much water is used and how much water do we have. But even with this old chart, you can see that the Colorado Basin, which is about 30 million people, get water from the Colorado River Basin. It's using more water than it has. That's why we're drawing down Lake Mead. That's why Lake Powell has got that big bathtub ring around it. So we've got to think about our water use in different ways. So reclamation, the Bureau of Reclamation is through Water Smart. We're providing grants to projects that conserve water and also projects that address the link between conservation and water use and energy use. In 2010, we gave a grant to a water district in Texas that will make improvements to its non-potable water system. And they're going to install a recovery turbine that's going to create 17,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity from wastewater flows. That's just a win-win situation. We're also standing up landscape conservation cooperatives and climate science centers at our universities that will tackle these changing climate issues and work with university experts to plan water resource management decisions. So it's a combination of on-the-ground actions and science to better understand our water resources and monitoring that will let us manage better. USGS has really been brought back to the forefront by Secretary Ken Salazar and Assistant Secretary Ann Castle. And science took a back seat in the last administration. And we've worked hard to restore the nation's premier science agency, USGS, to the forefront of Interior's decision-making and to offer USGS science to other agencies who will incorporate it in their decisions. In fact, I was really glad that the Raging Grannies weren't out there holding up a Department of Interior sign. I saw that they had a NOAA sign and DEQ in the Department of Agriculture, but luckily Interior escaped. So let me switch gears here a little bit and talk about one of the issues that I work the most on, and this is our management of the Glen Canyon Dam, which sits above Marble, Glen, and obviously Grand Canyon, and what we're doing to change our management of the dam so that we're protecting the Grand Canyon better. Incidentally, Secretary Salazar, he grew up in a rural part of Colorado. He's the water master for the lower Colorado River, and these issues are just so important to him. His personal story is pretty amazing. He grew up in a remote community, no electricity, no running water, no telephone, with 7 brothers and sisters, and all of them went to and graduated from college and all became very successful professionals. He's a really inspiring guy to work for, and he's an incredibly tireless worker. He's been traveling all around the country to places that haven't seen the Secretary of the Interior in 10 years, and meeting folks on the ground and really providing tremendous leadership. So the operation of Glen Canyon Dam obviously has been controversial for a number of years. I'm sure I don't have to tell the folks in this crowd about the Sierra Club's involvement and David Brower's regret over the compromise that led to Glen Canyon Dam. When I first started on this job, I had the opportunity to meet Floyd Dominy. Now, how many people in this audience know who Floyd Dominy is? A smattering. So Floyd Dominy was one of the longest serving and most powerful commissioners of the Bureau of Reclamation ever had. And right after I started my job in 2009, I was invited to this Floyd Dominy party. And I thought to myself, well, it must be some sort of anniversary. It was a 100th birthday party, and he was still alive. And there he was, sitting in the corner. He had a glass of wine, and he was well known for manipulating Washington politics back in the day. If you ever have a chance, read Cadillac Desert or Adventures with the Archdruid, which is about Brower and Dominy rafting down the Colorado. But there he was, sitting in the corner, holding court, and we got him to talk about what his regrets were. And his biggest regret was that he hadn't gotten to build any big dams on the Mekong River in China. So he was an unrepentant dam builder, even at 100. He died recently, but it was pretty interesting to meet a guy who was part of history. Whatever you think about him, he was certainly one of the most influential leaders that Interior had, famous or infamous. So the operation of Glen Canyon Dam has obviously been controversial for many, many years. And it continues to be controversial because we have a multitude of differing interests there. We have a national park, one of the the world's great wonders. We have a blue ribbon fishery up there at Lee's Ferry. We have folks that recreate on Lake Powell. We provide water to people throughout the West, including Las Vegas. We have endangered species. We have Indian tribes that live in the canyon and along the river. 7 tribes for whom this is a sacred place. We have cultural issues. We have our obligation to deliver water under the law of the river, which is a series of 20 or 30 compacts, treaties, statutes, case law, including the Grand Canyon Protection Act, which Congress enacted in the early 90s to tell us to operate the dam in a way that was more environmentally sensitive. We've had cooperation and we've had litigation, we've had threats, we've had setbacks, we've had a lot of battles. But over the last 2 years, with Ann Castle's leadership, we're starting to see a change in how the dam, how we're working with our stakeholders. We have a FACA committee, a Federal Advisory Committee Act group that is comprised of about 17 different stakeholders, including environmental groups, river rafting interests, tribes, and states that meet to try to define a better path forward on this dam. Grand Canyon. This is Glen Canyon Dam when a high flow experiment is being conducted, and I'll come back to that. This is the Humpback Chub. And the Humpback Chub, some folks say it's beautiful, some folks say it's ugly. But it is one of the few remaining native fishes in the Colorado River. And we all know that big dams change ecosystems. Among other things, they make the water colder, and they hold silt back behind the dam that used to flow down the river. Another interesting complication for the Humpback Chub is this guy, the rainbow trout, and that guy, the brown trout. These guys' favorite meal is little Humpback Chub. And one of the things that we've been really struggling with is how do you keep a recreational fishery going at Lee's Ferry upstream, which supports a pretty thriving economy of river guides and rafters, while still maintaining the complying with the Endangered Species Act, which is an obligation that Interior has to live up to. And we have the Little Colorado River, which comes in here, that happens to be one of the most sacred places for a number of Indian tribes. So what we're doing is we're evaluating how to address the problem of fish that eat chub and deal with the objections of tribal communities to taking fish, and taking trout means basically mechanical removal or killing them. Because the Little Colorado River is an incredibly sacred area, it's the spiritual umbilical cord of a number of the tribes, including the Pueblo of Zuni. One of the first issues that we tackled when we got to Interior in 2009 was this objection by the tribes to killing fish at a sacred site, which ran straight into our ESA obligation. And the tribes they hadn't had anyone to listen to them in 8 years. And they were really, we held the first tribal nation conference at the Department of Interior. President came, and there were tribes that were so emotional and happy that they finally had someone to listen to us. We have a trust obligation to the tribes. We have to consult with them on a government-to-government basis. And this secretary takes that so seriously, and so does everyone at the department. So we really wanted to work with the tribes to try to identify a solution that would make everybody happy. And I'm not actually sure we're going to get there. This is just the slide that shows where we were taking the trout, because that's where the Humpback Chub mostly live in the LCR because it's a warmer river, Little Colorado River. It's a warmer river because it's not dammed. So the trout like to congregate down there at the mouth of Little Colorado River, and the way they remove them is they have this electric ball, and they put it in the water, and the fish all swim to the electric ball, and then you scoop them out and remove them to a death. So, not to put it bluntly, I guess. So anyway, so we have an environmental assessment out on the street now, and we are looking at moving the location where we take the trout to a site that's not as offensive to the tribes. Some of the tribes actually don't care. They're totally fine with it, but to others it is extremely offensive. So working through all of those issues is a top priority. And we're working with, obviously, with the tribes, but also with the other communities and with our Fish and Wildlife Service, who wants to ensure that we don't have an issue with losing young humpback chub. So our environmental assessment, we have a 10-year proposed action that will remove fish at a different site and hopefully try to address some of that tribe's concerns by using them for a beneficial use. Many of the tribes keep captive eagles, so the trout can be frozen and used for fish food. We're trying to assess whether or not we can have them available for human consumption, which is has associated issues because some of these trout have whirling disease. So not any easy solutions here, but we're working hard to listen to all our stakeholders. The other big thing that we have going on in the Colorado River is high flow experiments. And I don't know, how many people have been down the Colorado? Anyone here rafted the Colorado? So when you're rafting the Colorado, you like to have beaches to camp on. That's important. But these beaches and the sediment in the Colorado River also form these backwaters under this little area here, which is important for fish spawning. This water is a little bit warmer, better for the chub. So it's good for the ecology of the area. And more sand is also good for cultural resources because it covers them up. Archaeological sites that are important to the tribes. And it helps keep down invasive species like weedy grasses and stuff like that. So we're looking at high flow releases that will take advantage of input from tributaries to the river that are downstream of the dam, obviously. And through these high flow releases, we'll build these sandbars and improve the ecology of the Colorado River. Basically, you take all the sand and you release up to 45,000 CFS from the dam, which is twice the normal flow of the dam, and carry that sand up high where hopefully it stays. One complication of high flow experiments is that the one we conducted in 2008 appeared to be extremely beneficial to our trout populations. One estimate was that the trout populations increased by 3,800%, which is a lot. So we have to be very cautious about how we implement this action because we don't want to, sacrifice one resource for the sake of the other. And again, we have that endangered species issue, which was important. So these big dams are not they're not easy to manage, but we are changing the face of reclamation. I think we're changing how we manage. We're focusing more on the reclaiming the damage that's been done in the past. We're not going to build big dams anymore. Those days are gone, like probably the coal fire plants that Bruce was talking about. But we can manage what we have better. We can restore the damage that we've done, and we can look forward to working in a more collaborative fashion within our own agency so that we're all speaking with one voice, Park Service being heard, and the Fish and Wildlife Service being listened to, and USGS at the forefront of the science. So we're doing a better job in our own house, but we're also doing a better job, I think, of working with our environmental stakeholders to hear their input. So I'm going to switch tracks again and talk a little bit about, let me go back here and talk a little bit more about these high-flow experiments and why we're doing a longer-term protocol. Because the sand doesn't last that long. This isn't unusual. Rivers take sand, they bring sand, so erosion is normal. The last high-flow experiment we conducted was in 2008. About 8 months after the high-flow experiment, you can see that a lot of that beach had eroded. So we're looking at a protocol that will increase the number of experiments that we'll do. We'll try to do them every time we have conditions that are right for a high-flow experiment, which could mean doing one every year instead of 3 that had been done sporadically over the last 15 years. And hopefully this will get us to a better place in the Grand Canyon. So, small hydropower, that's the last thing I want to talk about here. And I was warned that it might be a controversial topic for this crowd, so don't get out your pitchforks and your torches yet. Small hydropower development is another one of our priorities because we need to count on every type of renewable energy that we have out there. The Bureau of Reclamation has over 500 dams, and only 58 of them are powered by hydroelectricity. Now, that still makes us the nation's second largest producer of hydropower in the West, in the country, and providing low-cost power to 3.5 million homes. But we have a lot of opportunity out there on dams where we have existing structures, so the environmental impacts have largely occurred, and we can work with those structures where it makes economic and environmental sense to add hydropower. We've recently completed a study where we identified an additional 200 megawatts of power that could be added to 62 facilities. Now, not every site is going to be right for new hydropower, but at the sites there are, we need to look at what the benefits are of adding hydro. Secretary Chu, at a signing ceremony we did last year to cement a partnership with the Bureau, with the Corps of Engineers, Bureau of Reclamation, and the Department of Energy, said, "I'm for hydropower because I'm an environmentalist," and he was right about that. Environmentalists and hydropower interests don't have to be enemies. We have, through this memorandum of understanding, we're working with our traditional partners, other agencies, but we're also working with Trout Unlimited, with American Rivers, with the Nature Conservancy, and with other organizations to bring their views into new hydropower development. We're thinking about looking at hydropower development on a basin-wide scale. So that means that everybody, including the hydropower interests, have to be open to taking down dams. That's got to be on the table. But the environmental groups also have to be open to looking at hydropower development in places where it makes sense. Reclamation has thousands of miles of irrigation canals, thousands. And those basically run downhill through gravity, and there are opportunities to install turbines on the drops, which is what you're seeing in this picture. One irrigation district that I know of has the capacity to add 20 megawatts of new capacity, of new energy capacity. And what they'll do with that is they'll sell it back into the grid as green power, and they can take the money and they make improvements to their infrastructure. They line canals, and they conserve water through lining canals, and it's a win-win for everybody. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. We're not going to repeat the mistakes of the past. Those days are behind us. But we do need to look at identifying new sites, because hydropower is clean energy. 10 megawatts of new hydropower can displace 122 million pounds of carbon per year that would be produced by an average coal-fired plant. So even though the 200 megawatts we've identified at reclamation facilities doesn't sound like a lot, it can help to reduce our carbon emissions. We're also working with the Department of Energy to develop a funding opportunity that will look at new technologies. We want to fund research into fish-friendly turbines, and turbines that work better on these smaller drops. So that is in the works, and that should be coming out soon. There are a lot of really great small companies that are developing innovative technologies that will work in these smaller drops, and we want to create new jobs through those opportunities, and I think it's an exciting initiative. We're hoping we'll break ground on the first one sometime in the next year. So when you combine pump storage with a wind farm, when you combine a hydropower with wind, you get a technology that backs up an intermittent technology and can help provide baseload so that we have firm power supplies. We're, I think, going in the direction of developing more solar and more wind that will be brought into the grid, but we're not there yet. We have some work to do, and all of these pieces fit together and need to be considered as we move forward. So I just guess I'll wrap up with these are policy changes that the Department of Interior is making a priority. We want to ensure that water is strongly considered in all of our decision making, that we're evaluating all the options for hydropower, and that we're bringing Interior into the 21st century, which is much needed. Thank you.
So I think we're going to do a combined question and answer for about 5 minutes. So let Lori get a drink of water. If you guys have any questions, you can come up. There's a microphone in the center of the room and ask either of the speakers any questions you might have.
No questions? Run away?
Yes. First, the highest commendations, accolades for, this is basically directed to Bruce Nilles, for the work that Sierra Club and certainly all the activists, all the other people have been doing for many, many years to stop more coal plants from coming online and perhaps moving further than that. Having said that, however, let me express my greatest concern that the alternative being offered here, solar and wind, are being touted as clean energy. I found it interesting that you talked about the need for coal plants to not externalize their costs, to actually be assuming all the costs that are involved, and you were largely referring to environmental costs. That's what I want to bring to mind here with wind power and solar. If anybody that's gone to eastern Oregon along the Columbia Gorge and on both sides, Washington and Oregon, will see a tremendous scourge of these monoliths, these 200 to 450-foot monoliths that are not only an aesthetic outrage, but are also a danger to many creatures, including us. So my concern here is, and it's just, I realize it's a statement, but I'm hoping it will elicit some response from you, is that we are using these things to stay in the same paradigm instead of dealing with growth, instead of dealing with the true issues that we really should be facing, overpopulation and certainly consumption. We're simply looking for another panacea to get us out of facing those essential issues. The same goes for solar. I won't take more time to go into that, but solar in the desert, these large-scale solar projects are a danger to the desert tortoise. They're leaking into the ground in many places. And again, they help us avoid facing the true issues that I think are not even addressed. They're not addressed at all in any of the panels. No one wants to deal with population, but there are too damn many of us on the planet.
Can I just ask, if it's not wind or solar, even if we addressed overconsumption and population, we still need some electricity generation. How would you generate it?
Well, I'm not going to say that solar or wind power is not something we ought to be dealing with, but I think making them on a smaller scale basis and at the same time be talking about how be addressing population issues and addressing conservation issues rather than simply trying to keep chasing our tails is the direction to go. I think solar on top of buildings, solar and smaller, and the same with wind power. But these large-scale projects, it's always scale, it seems to me, is the issue.
You flag exactly the challenges we're facing as we think about shutting down these coal plants. How do we get enough power online at the same time we're addressing those other two issues of overconsumption and population? And those are things that within the Sierra Club we have campaigns specifically on both issues.
Good. Glad to hear it.
I think we are in the middle of a very tough series of discussions internally about large-scale solar projects in the desert. And we have spent, many folks within the Sierra Club for decades have spent time protecting our California, Nevada deserts. And now the big question is, are there parts of public and private lands where it is a fair trade-off? And that's something that we're wrestling with day in and day out. So this is not easy. I'm not going to say that there is a panacea. All indications are that rooftop is probably not enough. I think about the benefits. There's an enormous amount of wind development where everybody loves it. I think about the wind development in Iowa, which today gets 20% of its power from wind. The farmers love it. There is little to no discussion about the aesthetics because people like it. So I think part of it is also working out, particularly working for an organization like the Sierra Club, which has members in every state and every community, is, okay, we don't want coal. What are we going to do? How do we fashion a solution here in Oregon that works? And is it large-scale solar and wind or not? And if it's not, are we willing to do what's needed to actually get those other things to scale? So this is not easy, and these are exactly the conversations that are going on in thousands and thousands of communities across this country, which is, as we shut down the really bad stuff, how do we make sure that what we end up with is something that is actually acceptable, including aesthetics, and making sure that there's not major impacts on the wildlife front. So let me just stop there and just say, you are raising the right issues, and there are solutions being worked out in different places, and I'm going to stop there.
Well, I'll just add that along the lines of USGS telling us about scary stuff, they recently briefed us about the impacts of wind on bats and birds, killing 200 to 400,000 animals a year. And that's a lot because bats are really hard to count. So there are certainly environmental impacts that we need to think about when we're siting these and permitting these. And the same thing with water. As I said before about solar, I mean, these solar panels that are out in the desert have to be washed. They get dirty. And the siting of them where there are scarce water supplies or the kinds of solar panels that need a lot of water to work effectively is something that we have to think about when we're moving forward with this agenda.
My question's a little bit related. I really appreciated the comparison of costs, but I didn't see much discussion of where the materials that for solar come from, and I don't have a very good understanding of how mining the materials for solar power compares to the cost of some of the other environmental impacts for energy. Does that question make sense?
I think the question you're asking is, are we being honest about the energy consumption to make the wind and solar panels? And honest about...
I think my question was more, what is the environmental cost of solar energy?
In the production?
Yeah.
On the energy side?
Yeah.
The analysis I've seen, which looked at what are all the energy inputs for wind and solar versus, and the carbon consequences of mining and producing those versus running a coal plant, it's night and day. So from an energy input perspective and the energy output you get from wind and solar, it is a clear winner. So that's all the analysis that I have seen today, and obviously making sure that it continues to be the case is important so that we're not producing something that ends up having more environmental impacts than the very problem we're trying to fix.
Hi. I wanted to ask you about clean coal technology. I'm here from Ontario in Canada, which is in the process of shutting down its last coal plant. And one of the things that supporters of the coal technology that I've been hearing a lot lately in the lead up to an election there is that new scrubbers that they have over in Britain, they're removing 90% of the CO2 from the emissions. I'm not sure what to say in response to that.
Lies.
Yeah, that's what I imagined.
But not being quite so flippant, Ontario is a leader. Ontario, 5 years ago, had 5 coal plants. What's interesting about Ontario is that the government runs both the power plants and the health system. And so they did an honest assessment of what's wrong with this picture. We're spending this money on coal plants. We thought they were cheap, but now we're paying all the medical costs associated with coal burning. And they did an honest internalizing of the cost of health versus coal and said, this is insane. Even with scrubbers for sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, coal is still more expensive. So they have embarked on a plan to actually shut down all 5 coal plants, and I believe you're about halfway through that. So Ontario is, and at the same time, has embarked on one of the most aggressive clean energy investment programs at any place in the world. So what Ontario is doing is truly enormously exciting. Clean coal, which I hate to even use that term. I can't believe I use it. This myth. So about 8-10 years ago, as they were beginning to roll out these plans for new coal, they started using this term and spent an enormous amount of money in their ad campaign saying, oh, this thing called clean coal is here and it's ready for prime time. What they were talking about, and it was interesting, it was actually an NPR story where the lead lobbyist was on the radio, and someone pushed him, what exactly do you mean by it? Because you seem to be using it for everything that's not a pre-1990 coal plant. And the guy's response was, well, it's sort of an evolving term. It's sort of like medical technology. And so part of it is they use it just to confuse people, that in fact there is something that could be clean. And then sometimes they use it more discriminatingly for a project that can capture the carbon, pressurize it, put it underground, and keep it out of the atmosphere. But the problem is there are no such plants. And so there are no plants in England, where I grew up, that have scrubbers on for carbon dioxide. They have announced this project called FutureGen 8 years ago, and they have not yet put a single shovel in the ground. We actually said we weren't going to oppose it. It was a smallish project, 250 megawatts in central Illinois, because we actually wanted to see them build it, to see if it could be done, and to see how damn expensive it is. So they've been talking about it now for 8 years, 6 years, and they still haven't put a single shovel in the ground. Now, I'm convinced it's sort of like at a greyhound race, they want the rabbit just around the corner, because their whole story is, clean coal's about here, just wait, it's almost here. Well, what is it? Well, we argue about what it is, but it's not quite here. So it's just a PR scam dreamed up by the folks on Madison Avenue Are there a few demo projects where they're trying a few creative ideas to pull some of the carbon out? Sure, small demo projects. Do they amount to anything? Do we have anywhere near the ability to pipe and store underground millions and millions of tons of CO2? The answer is no. It's insane. Whether it works or not, it's economically delusional. From an energy perspective, for every 4 plants you build, you have to build a 5th one just to create enough energy to run the scrubbers. So the whole thing is just a house of cards. And while initially folks were like, oh, we should look at this more, and technology, we want to look at technology, it is panning out to be nothing but a lot of lies.